Donald Trump wanted Iran to look like Venezuela. His plan, to the extent he ever had one, was to make the Ayatollah Khamenei, or to take him out, and have him replaced with someone more accommodating to American interests. He was explicit in this. So speaking to Axios last week about who could become Iran's new supreme leader, Trump said, quote, "I have to be involved in the appointment, like with Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela." Trump, though, has not got his way. Mujtaba Khamenei was on Sunday announced as Iran's new supreme leader. If that name sounds familiar, there's a reason. Mujtaba is the son of the deceased supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The 56-year-old mid-ranking cleric has until now kept a low profile. Mujtaba Khamenei has never held government office or given public speeches or interviews. Nonetheless, thousands today gathered in Tehran's main square to pledge their allegiance to Iran's new ruler. When Trump called for Iranians to take to the streets last weekend, that's presumably not what he had in mind. And far from an Iranian Delcy, Iran's new leader is considered to be just as hardline as his father. And the fact that the US and Israeli strikes have now killed his father, his mother, his wife, and one of his children also means that Mujtaba Khamenei is unlikely to be willing to do the US or Israel's bidding. And that was a point made in this AI-generated video currently circulating on Rubica, which is an Iranian social media app.
Successor was chosen.
Who is he?
Mojtaba Khamenei. Khamenei again?
So that's the message the Iranians are looking to send to the USA and to Israel. But beyond the propaganda, who is Mujtaba Khamenei? To find out, I spoke to Iskandar Sadeghi, an Iran expert and lecturer at St. Andrews. And I began by asking him to tell me a bit about Iran's new supreme leader.
Mujtaba Khamenei is the second oldest son of the late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He's 56 years old. So we can look at this very much as kind of, I guess, a passing of the generational baton to a new elite within the Islamic Republic. He's basically never had any public office. So unlike his father, who was both in the Revolutionary Council at the very beginning of the revolution, he was the Friday prayer leader for Tehran, which is a very kind of significant position. He was then the president for 2 whole terms. Mujtaba, his son, has never had a public office per se, but he's kind of been known to be somebody who kind of operated more behind the scenes, was very active in his father's office, and was very obviously tapped in and well connected in terms of elite political networks. I mean, he also has a sort of a story whereby, he served in the Iran-Iraq War as a young man at the age of 17 through numerous campaigns. And then he basically took up studies, clerical studies, religious studies at the seminaries in Qom, and then studied with a series of senior clerics, what are often called sources of emulation or grand ayatollahs, as well as his father. And then it's claimed that he then taught what is known as Dars Kharij, which is the most senior level of Islamic jurisprudence. And he taught this for quite a few years. But again, in such cases, it's quite difficult, to really separate, truth from some degree of, let's just say, exaggeration. Or we're still figuring out really who he is. And I think the key thing to really grasp is that he's not well known to the Iranian public as such. I mean, unlike his father, who, like I said, had this sort of precedent and was known for at least, well over a decade before he was elected as Iran's supreme leader.
And would he have been chosen as the supreme leader had it not been for his father being killed. You know, if the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had just died of natural causes, he was 86, of course, would someone else have got this role?
I mean, on the one hand, obviously, like dynastic succession is, I mean, a taboo in the Islamic Republic. I mean, historically, it's been, Ayatollah Khomeini famously in 1971 actually even wrote a really searing statement, actually saying that Islam and sort of dynastic succession and like monarchy were fundamentally incompatible. So it's kind of been very much a taboo. And then even during his lifetime, when he was himself, the founder of the Islamic Republic, when he, in his own lifetime, when he was asked about his son, Ahmad Khomeini, maybe possibly succeeding him, he absolutely kind of repudiated it and dismissed it. So it's been something of a taboo. But I mean, there's also been rumors that Mojtaba Khamenei has been a very powerful person behind the scenes for at least I can remember as early as 2005. So famously, Mehdi Karoubi, who was a presidential kind of candidate both in 2005 and 2009, wrote a famous letter in which he basically alleged electoral interference, and he sort of claimed that Mojtaba Khamenei had played a very kind of important role backing one of the candidates, namely Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was then elected in 2005. So he's had like this powerful kind of role. Obviously, in Iran's system, the supreme leader has a significant part in determining the 6 jurors who sit on the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council then has the prerogative to then veto candidates who they deem unfit for office, basically, and to disqualify them. Has this sort of power of what's called approbatory supervision. And so the Assembly of Experts has simply gone through the same process. So who can stand for the Assembly of Experts is also overseen by the Guardian Council, and that means that various kind of notable candidates, whether it's Hassan Rouhani, yes, as well as Hassan Khomeini, the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, haven't been able to actually stand in these elections. So on the one hand, it's very clear that Mojtaba Khomeini has been a very influential person. Clearly, his father had very much this idea that he would play a significant role in the state. But I think because of the sort of ideological sort of foundations of the Islamic Republic, it would have been quite difficult. So I don't think it was a foregone conclusion that he was, from 2005, we can see his, Khamenei, his father, orchestrating this all. I think it's a bit more complex than that. So I do think that the war, in particular, I think the martyrdom of his father, his wife, his mother, and his child, and given sort of the very, very significant kind of symbolic weight of martyrdom in Shia Islam. And within the system, I think, these are all things which made his election far more probable. Also, I mean, the other thing that's even more important in many ways is that he's always been close to the IRGC and the security apparatus as well. So given the fact that Iran is in the middle of a war, it was always more likely that the IRGC and also powerful centers within the system were going to support a candidate who was going to carry on, in some sense, the legacy of his father, who was going to have a hard line in defending the country's independence and also, preserving the system, the Islamic Republic. I mean, so I think the war made it far more likely, even though you could argue that he certainly was being kind of nurtured to play a powerful role in Iranian politics and had been playing such a role. But I think this made it far more probable because under the conditions of the war, and where Donald Trump is basically saying that I should have a say in determining who should be the next supreme leader of Iran, I think a more conciliatory candidate would have obviously been perceived as a sign of weakness and capitulation and so on and so forth. So I think again the section of Mojtaba Khamenei is very much saying no, we're going to continue in the line of Khamenei Senior, and it's very much in essence sort of giving a sort of a middle finger to sort of Donald Trump and saying that they aren't going to be in a sense, swayed, not going to capitulate, basically, and they're going to carry on and inflict, it's going to have a significant price for the United States as well. So I think, it's a complex kind of picture, but the long and short of it is that, absolutely, I think that the war made it more likely.
Clearly, there's symbolism to this, right? It's saying, Donald Trump, you wanted to kill our leader and get someone more moderate or more accommodating. And not only have we picked another hardliner, he's literally got the same name as the guy you just killed. So you've replaced one Khamenei with another Khamenei. You can see the message there is strong. To what extent do you think that's the main reason he's been picked? Because obviously, he could have this job for the next 40 years. And, is there a danger that he hasn't been picked because he's going to be a particularly competent supreme leader and he's been picked for a sort of short-term messaging purposes? Obviously, the future is very uncertain, but is there a possible danger there?
There's lots of dangers there. I mean, so for instance, I think it's going to be profoundly alienating for many, many Iranians who aren't going to, even if those who maybe accept the Islamic Republic but are more on maybe the centre-right or the reformist wing of the political establishment, they're obviously going to be profoundly alienated. And many in the system might think that this is actually a violation of the basic foundations and principles of the Islamic Republic, as I said. I think that is a real kind of danger. But I think the thing that we have to think about is that the Islamic Republic generally, in times of crisis, what it does, it tends to double down on the base, on the real hardcore base. So that's really the key thing. And because they understand that that's the kind of the social base and the forces which are going to mobilize in the streets when they're called upon to. They're going to mobilize and they're going to fight in both the IRGC or the paramilitaries, the Basij. And they're the ones who are going to attend the Friday prayer sort of rallies and, Jerusalem Day, Quds Day, and these sorts of things. And they are, in a sense, the backbone of the system, even if they are, maybe we could say 15 to 20% at most, maybe 15% even. It's hard to really know. But they are the significant base. They're the people who are going in Revolution Square right now. They're the ones who are pledging their sort of pledge of allegiance to Moshtaba Khamenei. And so, the Islamic Republic and the elite there understands that these are the people that it can fundamentally count on. But the other point I think to bear in mind is that, Moshtaba Khamenei is not going to be ruling alone. And again, we don't really know how long his tenure will last. We really don't. The Israelis have basically vowed to assassinate him. So we don't really know, actually. It's a very risky job that he's actually chosen to take on because he could last, barely a week, or he could last a much longer time. But yeah, I think that, we have to see really, the thing is, because he has had public office, we're not really sure how he's going to rule. But I think, the fact that he has genuinely operated in sort of smoke-filled back rooms, so to speak, and hasn't been really subject much to sort of the light of day and hasn't really been trying, we don't really have much of an idea of how he actually operates. I doubt that's really going to change. And he might actually be, living a kind of underground life for a while as well. So that obviously, opens up another series of questions. But yeah, I think, like I said, I think they've doubled down really on the core social base for the moment. How that will obviously play out in the longer term, we have to see. There are some of his supporters who are under the impression that he is going to be a big force fighting corruption and modernizing the system and all these sorts of things. But again, there's no track record, so to speak. And the other thing, like I have to say, is that he's going to be, like I said, for a while, he's going to be dependent not only on the IRGC and the security apparatus, obviously, but also kind of significant players. So Ali Larijani, who's the head of the Supreme National Security Council, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of the Parliament. So significant kind of players in the system. He's going to have to kind of rely on them and their cooperation and going along and things like this. But I think the Revolutionary Guard obviously was a big factor in this. And the fact that there's an ongoing war, and they didn't want to really have division and disagreement at the top. They really kind of also wanted to quickly choose a leader because they wanted to send a message clearly to the Israelis and the Americans that they have a leader, there's a clear direction to the state, and they're actually not going to be deterred, or they're not going to be cowed by the ongoing war.
There are sort of questions, or I suppose, people looking on from the outside, there's confusion about who really is in charge, right? Because, this was most pronounced on Saturday morning. The president, Masoud Pezeshkian, sort of apologizes to the Gulf states and said, we're going to stop aiming at your civilian infrastructure. And then later in the day, some of those Gulf states say, well, actually, you're still shooting at us. And lots of people's interpretations that the president didn't have much power in the IRGC, weren't necessarily supportive of what he had publicly said. To what extent does the Iranian regime seem quite divided at this point in time?
President Pezeshkian, I think from what I understand, and again, we don't really know, but I think I got the impression, or some people have circulated this idea that he did this on a rather ad hoc kind of basis. And then he then came out later and actually said it was misinterpreted and misread. And obviously, in stating that, I'm sure you saw Donald Trump quickly put out a Truth Social by saying, oh, this is a sign of capitulation and so on and so forth. So no, I think that was really by more powerful elements within the system quickly kind of repudiated that idea. And I think it's very clear he's not in the driving seat, and he hasn't been. I mean, he wasn't even in the time of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He's in the latter part after the June War. After the June War, Ali Larijani clearly and the IRGC were clearly in the driving seat and were clearly the main decision makers on national security. I mean, there's even sort of anecdotes where Pezeshkian was asked certain things and he actually said, please refer to Ali Larijani because he's the one who's ultimately deciding. So I don't think it's divided. I just think that the president is actually, in the case of the war, is actually marginalized, and it's the Supreme National Security Council which Ali Larijani is heading, and of course, in which sort of major military figures and the Speaker of Parliament and so on they all sit on the Supreme National Security Council, and they're making decisions with respect to the war. I mean, and they're the ones who have adopted this like mosaic posture sort of strategy, whereby even if senior officers in the chain of command are killed, then basically those on the ground will continue and know their orders and will continue to actually fire or conduct the war as they've been instructed. But yeah, Pezeshkian's not in the driver's seat. And I don't really think those who are making decisions are not divided, but the broad political elite within Iran, yeah, of course. I mean, former presidents like Mohammad Khatami or Hassan Rouhani and various others, though Hassan Rouhani has sort of basically offered his congratulations to Mujtaba Khamenei. So we see many people kind of in the context of the war are showing themselves to be supporting the system, supporting the state. I mean, the question always is like, once the war ends, and we don't know when that's going to happen, then that's usually when contention and division and disagreement starts to really come to the surface. And similarly, at the level of society more broadly, I mean, again, we're seeing a kind of a strong front in many ways, especially as many have realized that this war is not a war of quote unquote liberation. It's really having devastating effects for the entirety of the society. Many sort of, they're standing behind the state, or if not, they're basically, obviously, definitely not welcoming this sort of act of aggression. But then, obviously, once the dust settles, that's when you'll see the disagreement coming out. But yeah, I don't think Pezeshkian is a player. I mean, he really isn't a significant figure, and he hasn't been for quite a while.